Most of the time when I get a blade in the mail, I completely forget to do a first look of any sort. It gets all scuffed up, beat up, maybe degrade the edge, resharpen it before I even remember that I need to be filming. So I am going to start off by showing you this Reiff Knives F6. This is in MAGNACUT, and it's an excellent blade, and it's still relatively clean. I've only used it 5 or 6 times so far, so it's a great time to show you what the blade is going to look like from the factory. And that is an amazing finish on the blade. Really like it. That MAGNACUT is exciting. Big thick tang on this guy, but still broad and very slicey. Razor's edge on this knife, absolute razor's edge. It's hair shaving sharp from this end to the tip. The entirety of this knife is actually ground just perfect. I took a lot of time and looked at the edge. I looked at what was ground, what was polished, what was buffed, and it is exactly even all the way through on that edge. I took a lot of time and looked at it. The uniformness of the actual tip is perfect. Now, just to be a snob, I took out the calipers and took some measurements in different places, and I'm telling you, this blade was actually ground, as far as I can tell, to perfection. Amazing blade, and again, it's going to be in that MAGNACUT, kind of a limited edition deal here that you're only going to find at the Reiff Knives website. You're not going to find this other places currently. Got a tan configuration for the handle. It comes in several colorations, quite a few. Micarta as well as G10. XL size hands. I wear XL size gloves. And as you can tell, this handle is totally sufficient for big guy hands, which is one of the bigger selling points for me, is that I just find it fits so well for someone like myself. Lanyard hole in the rear. Nice rounded corners, contoured in every possible direction, which is one of the nice things about micarta or G10, is you can get some really nice smooth lines out of them. Absolute perfection. This is probably the highest quality blade I have ever reviewed. Actually, I kind of know it is. This is just incredible quality. The sheath is going to be something familiar to a lot of us. This is a JRE sheath. These are known for being very high quality, effective. There's his maker's mark on the back. It's going to have 2 grommets on the bottom, 1 on top. With some pass-through capability if you want to put cordage on there, or maybe find a way to attach your fire steel. I've seen some creative ways that people can do that. It's going to have the ability to be drop leg, which I often use in the wintertime. In fact, sometimes I'll add a climbing carabiner to this linkage so I can quickly attach it to my belt or my coat or my pants and have it drop down low enough that I can actually get access to it in the winter. Or you can belt carry it kind of standard, which is what I do in the summertime, just like that. Knife drops in really well. And yes, it absolutely does hold it in reverse. Not that you would ever use it in that configuration, but if it slides around in your bag, I don't believe this is going to slip out. Maybe with some usage and time, I'll desire to wet form it, but currently I have no need to do that at all. It's a perfect fit, a glove fit for this knife. The sheath also comes with a fire steel attachment, as previously mentioned, and there are 2 strings that are going to run through, so it's sewed well, and the edges of the sheath are very well done. One nice thing about a leather sheath like this, and one of the reasons I sometimes prefer a leather sheath, is because you can almost use this as a strop. Now in MAGNACUT, I'm not sure that I'm going to be doing a lot of that, but at least it's something there as a possibility for somewhat of a strop. If I do have a field sharpener with me and I'm going to beat up on a blade a little bit, I can go back and forth from time to time. In fact, a lot of times I'll actually put compound in my sheaths right here, which I have not done yet, obviously, on this blade. Haven't even added the fire steel yet. But this is kind of a first look just to see what you have going on here. Scales are removable. whether you have the G10 or the micarta, and there's Torx hardware underneath. Everything about this is going to be premium. So the hardware itself is absolutely premium. The fit is perfect. The indentation, the countercut inside there is perfect so that these fit exactly how they should in the handle. It's not sticking out awkwardly, and it's not so far in that you have a void for your hand. Absolutely perfect fit and finish on the spine. You can't even tell where the scales begin and the steel begins. You can't feel any ridge whatsoever. They are absolutely perfect. That's one of the reasons a lot of people are going to be into this knife, is this is like the perfect production knife. Lots of time put into the design of this and the handle. I know that Stu has put a number of people on task with kind of deciding what does the handle feel like for multiple kinds of grips, multiple kinds of hand sizes. And all of them have given their feedback, and this is what they came up with for the F6 at least. And it's very reminiscent of some of the other handles that you're going to see. I've had the joy of using a few of them, and all of them have been excellent for my XL size hands. I've had no complaints. When it comes to slicing capability, this isn't much of a test, but it is something that would happen for me if I'm actually going to test food, and it slices through so easily. Being that thick, it's not an issue because it's that broad, and it does thin out to a really decent taper here. So fruit has not given me an issue. Cutting up small slices for my kids has not been an issue. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and just show you. Absolutely transparent, very, very thin. And this is a soft medium, I know, and so that's going to change things a little bit. Let's go with something a little harder. Got a bad piece of apple here to cut off. And I'll cut a slice out of this, and we'll just see how thin of a slice is practical with this one. Yeah, pretty much translucent. So for how thick of a blade it is, I'm telling you guys, this isn't going to be much of an issue when it comes to food prep. Although, if I try to do bigger cuts here with something thicker, it is going to blow it apart a little bit. It's just the nature of getting to this thickened portion in here. That's what's going to happen, is it's going to start wedging a little more, and I'm not concerned about that. That doesn't bother me at all. I didn't expect this to be, you know, a food prep expert blade, but I'm actually impressed that it does as well as it does. I think it's got a lot of belly, but it's got a lot of a straight portion here to function in slicing and cutting up food pretty practically. So I'm actually a big fan of using it for the kitchen. A couple leaves of lettuce, and I'm really impressed at how slicey the edge is. I know that it's sort of a thicker tang to this knife, but it just slices really well, and there's a lot of belly there to work with. And I'm going to be careful because I feel like I could really cut my finger off with this thing. It is thin enough of an edge that it has no problem with food like this. Plenty of belly to work with. And it can dice. It can do it a little bit. The handle is not going to allow for too much of that kind of work. Obviously, this is not a kitchen design handle, but it's not terrible because it still has a little bit of the feel where I can pinch grip, kind of like a normal kitchen knife. And in fact, I don't use a lot of normal kitchen knives. Here's one. Here's a carbon steel kitchen knife that I use. And this right here is a very thin blade. There's a kitchen knife that's very thin. The tang is continuous. It's kind of a different thing with the handle scales here. A little bit of flare to the handle where it does get thicker. And this is just very easy. It's small, it's wieldy. The weight is light. But I don't think there's a huge advantage to that when I'm doing simple tasks that I do. I don't work in the kitchen for very long. And if I'm backpacking or hiking, I don't use the knife a huge long time. I'm not cooking food for several people. It's just myself. Okay, what I'm working on here is a piece of fruit wood. I think this is actually apricot. This was a branch of apricot that I had dried for a couple years, and I had waxed the ends. One of the reasons it's important to wax the end, one of the reasons it's important to wax the ends is so that they don't split and crack on you as they dry out, because they do tend to get very crackly. And It's just a difficult wood to preserve. So I had put some wax on the ends, and then I'd split it down. Just recently, actually, just a couple weeks ago, I'd split it down, and then I cut it down a little bit further now using the Reiff knives F6. And so I cleaned off a nice flat stave right here, took the edges off a little bit. I usually work with that when I'm making a teaspoon, and actually my daughter asked me for a new play teaspoon. She wanted a pretty one, and so I'm just for fun making her one using the Mora, which I just dropped. Is this the 164, the 162? I couldn't tell you, but it's basically been used so many times I've reprofiled the blade completely. And these hook knives work well, they're cheap, and they do the trick even on a very hard wood. And that's one thing I would comment on with the Reiff so far, is it's a very hard wood to work with. After splitting, after carving and flattening out this portion, a little bit of bowl starting with it, the edge is still phenomenal. No issues with that at all. And I carve against this hard, very hardened piece of cherry down here. It's a good stump to cut against. But now what I need to do is think of a design, and then I'm going to chop and slice it out, cut it out, carve it out with this F6. So I just rough outlined a little bit on the spoon. This is a design I've done 100 times before. I used to do consignment with spoon carving, and I would just rough cut spoons like this all the time. Very often, not even with a hatchet. As long as I have as long as I have a small enough branch to work with, I very often don't have to use a hatchet in the first place if I have a decent knife like what I'm using here, which can get some of the general shape and do material removal. This chops surprisingly direct and well. I've got good controllability. I've got no lanyard on it, but I am getting good precise cuts here, which is very important. I'm better with a hatchet than I am with a knife when it comes to material and stock removal. But one advantage of a knife is I have this big long cutting surface. It is thin, and I can make some really, really, really nice direct cuts exactly where I need to be. And it's got that slicey motion, because even with a hatchet, with a certain kind of carving hatchet, that's what I'm going to be doing, is slicing material away with each cut. And that has a big, broad, heavy head. There's some advantages to using a hatchet, but for what I'm doing right now, this is going to be just fine. And obviously I've gotten the core material removed. I'm going to see how it carves, even with a hard fruit wood. And it looks like it's not having too much trouble. It's going to be a little chippy because of how hard this wood is. As you can tell, I'm going to choke up all the way on the blade. My fingers on this handle for comfort are going to go right up to that choil, and I actually grab the choil and I bring the wood right back here. So for me, the sharpening choil, it makes sense, but I'm really glad that he brings the blade all the way back, and I could even do without the sharpening choil. I don't have to have that, but I'm glad that it goes all the way back, and then I don't have to wait for the blade to start up here, because just about every knife I've ever used that has an additional finger choil, it's just not that useful for me, because I can just pinch grip back here if I need to make certain kinds of cuts that have that precision, if I need to get right up on something. So I want the blade to come back as far as possible. And this one is going to do it just right. Actually pretty slicey. I'm happy to see that. Good amount of controllability. It's not going to overbite because it's not a Scandi, so it's going to have a reasonable amount of material removal with each cut. And with that big blade, there is an advantage, and I love that about these big blades, is it's thick on the spine. Spine is not incredibly sharp. It's actually somewhat rounded. I would say it's smoothed out a little bit on the spine. So when I go to do a reinforced cut with my thumb, it's very comfortable. And I've got lots of belly to work with here, slicing in and not damaging my thumb by pushing into this rock wood that I've got here. I probably should have carved this a year ago, but it's going to work out fine for my daughter as a little toy. Got a knot right there, incredibly hard knot. Fruitwood knots are crazy. Those can be blade damagers. A lot of times I will take the hatchet to get a hold of those because they can just fold an edge. They can wreck a Scandi instantly when you get to a bad fruit knot. It's like a pine knot with resin in it almost. Nope, got through that just fine. Yep, looks good. No issues so far. Comfortable. I'm doing well with the handle. No issues there whatsoever. I didn't expect any. I'm quite familiar with this handle and the style. I love the aesthetic of the blade. It's just a fun blade to carve with and whittle with. Man, I do love that handle a lot. Very comfortable. G10 is doing excellent. Just an appropriate amount of grip that I find in the G10. So here's where I'm at so far. Right now, what I'm doing is radiusing the interior edges. So I'm going to kind of do as I did up here. These, if you can tell, I know with the texture it's probably hard to tell, but I've actually radiused the contour here on the edge. And I'm working on that right here. So I'm only skimming the wood. I'm only taking a very small amount off. And then I might do it on the backside too, it depends. The more difficult parts where a bigger knife really is a challenge would be like the stem up here and this ball. Sometimes I do a diamond, sometimes I do a ball. This is kind of in between. These tend to be difficult because I'm taking a knife that is this big. It's bigger than the spoon is. And then I'm taking very fine cuts and I have to do a lot of pinch grips to get in there and scrape it away. It's not as thin of a blade overall, so I have to be really careful with these kinds of cuts. And then when I'm doing the radius edges here, maybe I'll do one on the camera. When I do these radius edges, I'm using the belly of the knife and I'm pushing. I'm not really slicing them. I'm actually pushing against the wood. And I want to be careful doing this on camera because I'm not focusing very much on what's in my hands. And it actually works really nicely because it's not a Scandi. I love Scandis. And I think I would love the Reiff knife Scandis. I haven't had the chance to try those yet, but I think I would love those. But because it's not a Scandi, I don't have to worry quite as much about it biting in a lot and taking too much of the wood out and digging in. When you're doing a radiused edge like that or chip carving, sometimes a Scandi isn't exactly what you want. So I'm going to try one more time. Mostly just doing a push cut. And it is slightly more fatiguing with a big knife, but obviously this knife isn't made for making spoons and doing these little fine crafts. I'm mostly doing it because number one, I can and I like to. And number two, it kind of shows you that the blade does have a lot of versatility. And there we go. So that's what it looks like so far. Not too bad. It's actually kind of turned out to be a nice piece of wood. And the blade is doing just fine. Controllability is absolutely there. Occasionally, when I'm working with something really small like these corners up here, I do have to do something a little more creative to get in there. So sometimes I do a pinch grip like this, kind of a modified pinch grip, and I come up and remove material like this when I'm using a bigger blade. And that's just for safety. It's a little safer for the project as well than doing this. This isn't bad for safety as far as my hands go, but I might actually exert too much force and chip or cut into this wood too far. And it is a hard piece of wood, so it does tend to chip a little bit. Kind of chops out big chunks of wood as I'm going through it. Plus I do have a knot that I've had to work through right on the neck of the spoon. And so occasionally it's actually easier for me to, again, use a pinch grip, move up and just kind of move on the spine, kind of move on the spine with my fingers like this versus trying to go back here, which isn't a terrible design. You know, it's a broad enough blade that I can really stay far away from it. I feel safe It would be a little bit easier with my actual carving knives, but I'm not struggling with this. It's just a little bit more hand fatiguing for these really finite tasks, which is totally to be expected. All right, let's give it a test with just what I have here. It's a good solid sized log. And I'll try to make sure you can see how it works as I go through. That's a solid piece of wood, but it popped it. Oh yeah. Not too much difficulty with that. Got kind of twisty in there. And I find that, it's enough blade length. You can see that there, it's enough blade length to process most practical firewood limbs that you would find laying on the floor of the woods somewhere, and then to make that into tinder as well. This piece of wood is making atrocious, terrible feather sticks, but you get the idea. It can do all of that just fine. Test out a little bit of chopping. That sinks in there pretty good. That's a really good bite. I think it's because of that grind angle right there. It's going to bite pretty well. Definitely chips out some nice sized chunks. Lots of power behind that full tang blade. It's a good thickness for it. And it's got the power to chop through reasonable sized logs, I think just fine. Maybe do a little bit of shaping. There's a lot of power in it, and I don't have a lanyard. I think I could get even more confident strikes with a lanyard.